Hello and welcome everyone to VConf 2022. I'm your host, Jesse Tomshock. We have an amazing panel here today. I'm going to, let's see here, drop our title card so we can get a view of everybody. We're going to talk about frameworks today. You see some regular characters here and some new faces. So let's go around. Brett, let's start with you. Give us a little, who are you? What framework are you working on? What are you shilling this week? Type and just go around and then dig right in.
Sure, sounds good. My name is Brett Little. I work at Shopify. I'm on the Hydrogen team. Hydrogen is a web framework built by Shopify for building custom storefronts. It's built on top of React, and it's optimized for building really dynamic commerce experiences, specifically with the Shopify API. But excited to be here.
I'm Ben McCann. I'm a Svelte contributor helping to build SvelteKit. And SvelteKit gives you a router, library packaging, form handling, kind of a batteries included approach to building an app with Svelte.
I have to find the unmute button before I can speak. Hi, I'm Mishko. I'm the CTO of Builder.io. We are working on a CMS system, but also on this cool thing called Quick. Previously, in my previous life, I did this thing called Angular that you might have heard about. Quick's big thing is that it's resumable. It's kind of a different way of thinking about how applications are delivered to the user.
Hey, my name's Ryan. I creator of Solid.js, and I've been working on a meta framework for Solid called Solid Start recently, and I work at Netlify in open source.
Hey everybody, my name is Fred Schott, and I work on a project called Astro, which is a way to build websites with a content focus using this really cool technology called islands. So I see Svelte, React, Vue, Solid, everyone represented here. We have a story to tell with all of those frameworks, so it's a pretty interesting spot to be in.
My name's Daniel Rowe. I'm on the Nuxt team. Nuxt is a progressive web framework built on top of Vue with some interesting serverless sugar, some other interesting things to talk about.
All right, excellent. So I think the first question I maybe throw out is, which framework is best? And just let you guys sort of fight it out, sort of like the Thunderdome style. No, we the question I wanted to start with to the group is, so at VConf, we're here at Vite, and as a regular user, I tend to use Vite in certain ways and use plugins. I'm curious, we were getting started, and I tried to hold back before we got started. Where does Vite fit into your daily workflow and like your effort at a framework level? Because like for me, it's I work up here, you know, building on top of what you guys do. Like I feel like our day-to-day work is very different. So maybe our interaction with the Vite and the Vite ecosystem and the Vite plugins is probably very different too. So I'm really curious from your guys' perspective, from the group's perspective, like what do you do with it that, you know, how do you interact with it day to day, like plugin style or configuration or considerations or anything like that, that you might find normal day to day, but I'm curious to hear it because it's probably very different than what I do.
So we have an interesting story with Vite, which is we actually started first by building a Vite competitor. If anyone knows Snowpack, that was actually came up around the same time as Vite. Very similar goal, very similar project, and Astro is very much built on top of that. So we ended up using Vite almost like after the fact we migrated to it versus starting from scratch on top of it. So I think a couple other projects in this ecosystem very much are like plugins. They are super kind of like, they were built with that in mind. We very much sit on top of Vite. We ship our own CLI, our own kind of ecosystem, and we very much use Vite as a tool inside of ourselves versus more of the like kind of use Vite and we're like powering it behind the scenes. We sit on top versus underneath, which I don't know if that's shared by everyone here.
So I guess maybe that might be similar for us as well in that we have our own server, for example. So we use Vite's dev server under the hood, for example, for our server rendering with a clever utility built by Anthony Fu called Vite Node. But yes, Nuxt is very much in front of Vite in terms of an experience for users, and that's I think that's really important in terms of how we present it. But it obviously means that there are some interesting things Vite makes available. So being able to step back into what used to be called sort of middleware mode, so it can handle requests and do all of its magic. But when invoked, when summoned, it does that. And that means that there are some things which are maybe a little bit different as well. Vite dev server proxy handling, for example, isn't quite the same with Nuxt as it would be in a pure Vite context.
I mean, I think most of us use Vite in a similar way, right? Like Vite does bundling, hot module reloading, has the dev mode and production mode, coordinates with rollup. All of those things you need no matter which framework you use, and somebody has to do it. And it's kind of nice that as a community, like the world came together, and now is a standard way of doing these problems. And hopefully, this kind of attitude of like figuring out standard ways of doing things will spread to other areas as well.
It's funny you say that. Yeah, someone had to do it. I was really hoping that someone wasn't going to be me. To be honest, I'm one of those like library over framework kind of people. I prefer just kind of fiddling with stuff rather than telling everyone how the thing should go. But Vite provided something that was really compelling to me. The plugin system, like just having that ability to have these pieces that I could immediately see were reusable, composable. They made it me go, okay, maybe I can do this. Like at times I feel like I got kind of bullied into making a meta framework because like, oh, everyone needs one of those. But I'm so happy to be here and see what we can do with Vite.
Yeah, Vite 3 introduced this concept of modes, and so it's got SPA mode, multi-page app mode, and then this new custom mode. And so we've been using custom mode in SvelteKit, which has really allowed us to do SSR rendering and a number of pre-rendering and different modes that we have, and then mix and match with all the different plugins in the Vite ecosystem. So if you want to turn off the service worker that SvelteKit provides out of the box, you can use a plugin to do that. You can use Vite plugins to do image optimization and all of these other things that are available throughout the ecosystem.
Yeah, I actually want to correct. I think SvelteKit was actually the first to move from Snowpack to Vite. We actually, I think, saw that you all were doing that. We're like, oh no, we should look at it too. I don't think we were first there. Actually, I take that back.
What were some of Fred, I want to dig into this a little bit because you guys had worked on Snowpack, right? And I remember Snowpack as sort of a new way to sort of bundle and stuff. What was the motivation to step away from that sort of low level work and leverage Vite instead?
Oh god, I could write a whole post. I actually did write a bit of a looking back post if anyone wants to go find that, like what I learned building Snowpack. There were a couple things. One thing that Vite did really well was the decision early on to base itself on rollup. You can even hear a couple of people here talking about that, like Ryan, like the idea that you can pull from that ecosystem immediately. Snowpack was all about like, no, we're going to do it different. We're going to do it better. And, then building an ecosystem from scratch, very difficult.
Honestly, I think it isn't just the ecosystem too. At least building upon the rollup API has, I think, made it easier for onboarding for us too, because we build a series of Vite plugins for Hydrogen, and those are key to how Hydrogen works. And like as new team members come on board and such, if you have familiarity with rollup, you're kind of at home now once you're actually editing some of these plugins for Hydrogen as well and working on the project.
Yeah, there's quite a bit of overlap between the Svelte community and Rollup community. Rich wrote both Svelte and Rollup, and so for us, like we were very, very familiar with that API already, and it definitely helped us hit the ground running and was a big contributor to us running with Vite.
We've been forced in Nuxt to be almost compiler agnostic, because we support both Vite and Webpack out of the box as bundlers for the Vue part of the application. and obviously Vite is by default what's installed. But we also have a compile. We compile that output again another time into our server, and that's Rollup that does it. Rollup and ESBuild, and obviously ESBuild is involved in the Vite process as well. So you think, how many different compilers can you possibly have in one framework? But it means that all of what we want to write, so we auto import composables, for example, not just in the Vue part of the application, but also in this Nitro, this server side part of the app too. So if we want code base that can be shared, it has to be generic enough that works in Vite, it works in Webpack, it works in Rollup. And so we've had to very much sort of step back in terms of, rather than the in-depth part of Vite plugins where you can, pull in Vite config and, stick the server in a temporary variable and interact with it or something like that. We've had to be much more generic in our approach and interpretation, which I think it's definitely shaped how we interact with Vite. We can't be quite as much fingers in the pie, but hopefully it means that we come up with something that is maintainable and rigorous and maybe less prone to sort of needing to be refactored as we grow.
Yeah, I think that leads to like the other part of what makes Vite so important for us. I mean, look at all these frameworks represented here. Like, it would be silly to be like, no, come over here to this other ecosystem. Especially for a project like Astra, where we have a great story for every framework. Why would we try and do that somewhere else when all those frameworks are living in this ecosystem pretty remarkably fast? Everyone has moved to this way of thinking, which is just so exciting. So the interop, the ecosystem, that's what gets me really excited about Vite.
Can I jump in and add some to it? So I think it's super cool that Vite is on top of Rollup. So in Quick, we have this thing called the optimizer, which is actually in Rust, but it transpiles to WASM. And because it transpiles to WASM, we now can have it as a plugin to Rollup. And so our custom compilation path is fully supported now in Vite and Rollup because it's just how extensible these things are, right? And so I think that's a key to it, right? Like being able to say like, okay, Vite does 90% of what I need, but I just need to change a little tiny thing, and have hooks so that you can do the thing that you want to do in a way that's both easy, but also extensible so that others can continue doing that as well. And so I think this is the value that Vite brings to the table, right? Is that out of the box with Rollup, it does, 90 or 100% of, depending on your use case. But then if you want to extend, you can do so.
And I think as a group, we're solving a lot of the same problems. SvelteKit had a predecessor framework called Sapper. And, we were trying to implement some of the things that now exist in Vite on our own. And it took a lot of time away from building the framework itself and wasn't as stable and as powerful as those corresponding features in Vite.
I double want to down on that, which is that, when you're building a framework, there's certain value add that you're adding, right? And so the last thing you want to do is spend your time and energy on something that really isn't the value add, right? Like everybody needs to have a build system. Everybody needs to have a hot module reloading. It's just a thing that you need to have in order to be competitive. And so how wonderful it is that you could just like piggyback on top of existing system that just does it rather than reinventing and being different, right? And having yet another way of how you are, because the more different you are, the more difficult it is for people to join, etc. And so the fact that you can just have the basics out of the box is just a huge one.
I think it's a very interesting question for Vite, because in a sense we're all consumers of Vite, and we know a little bit what it's like to interact and talk with consumers of our frameworks and libraries and different demands. I will say Patak is amazing in terms of how he interacts with and juggles, I guess, the not competing, but the different demands, the different uses that we all have for Vite. But and just to say that it's a difficult thing to build something that can be that common platform without just sort of degenerating into some kind of chaotic mess, which Vite isn't at all. Vite has this clear central vision, and yet it is, it's a common ground for us all.
Yeah, I think I saw everybody sort of nodding along with you, Daniel, as you praised the sort of vision and way that Vite goes about handling the different needs, because these open source projects, they get everybody needs are if you go into Git issues, we've all seen that there's only so much time, and that it's not like the great Vite corporation is paying for this in spades, right? It's a very sort of different monetary model of sorts, however that might work out. I wanted to, we've talked about commoditize. Misko brought up a great point that I want to get everyone's opinion here about commoditizing the things like hot reloading and server-side rendering and that sort of stuff. What would be, as all of you are working on your frameworks and things, what would be the next level or next tier or feature that you feel that you would like to do less, that could be sort of commoditized in a Vite-centric kind of way, where you're like, you know what? Everybody requires it. It's table stakes, and I hate doing it. So if we could just put a layer there to sort of take that off my plate, that would be great. I think, Misko, I'm going to start with you because I think you might have an answer off the top of your head while everyone else sort of thinks about it.
Because, I don't have an answer for you directly for the question you're asking. So I'm going to answer something slightly different, but it's the same kind of a point, I think, which is that when I started Quick, I really wanted to not reinvent as much as possible, right? And so Vite was obviously one of them, hot module reloading, etc. And so that was a kind of a no-brainer, and it actually worked. The other thing I wanted to not reinvent is to actually not reinvent rendering. And so I looked really hard into Solid, React, Angular, even Lit, to see if Quick could run on top of an existing rendering system. Turns out in that particular case, the answer was no. Ryan is shaking his hands it's not that simple. The answer is no. But in the case of Vite, it actually worked out beautifully. It's really nice to be able to go to people and say hey, we just run on top of Vite, which means bring all your plugins along, bring your things like CSS imports, etc. It just all works out of the box. When it comes to higher level things like frameworks or rendering, I think the problem is that there is a bajillion different ways you could be doing it. And as a result, there isn't one best, or rather, it isn't clear what the one best way of doing it is yet in the industry. Whereas I think when it comes to a lower level things like bundling and delivering content, there's a general consensus on what the best way of doing things is. And I think that's the advantage that Vite has. And that's the reason why Vite can be successful across things, because everybody kind of looked at the problem and everybody kind of came to about the same conclusion. And the problem space and the surface area is relatively well constrained, rather than sort of something complicated as a rendering pipeline.
I think that's an interesting point, because I think if you look at the previous generation of build tools, sure, you might build an Angular app or you might build a React app or something like that, but oftentimes your build system would get so complex. With whatever tool you're using, you start to wonder, have I really built a React app, or have I built this crazy complex Webpack app that happens to just compile down into some sort of React sort of thing? I guess my point is if the tooling is solid up front, that it has the features that you need, like a lot of Vite configs I've looked at from different merchants that built on top Shopify, they're not doing anything almost at all in it. They're just taking pretty much everything that's stock out of Vite and rolling with it. And I think there's something there, if you don't have a crazy bespoke sort of configuration, it's more portable, it's more maintainable, it's less of a framework in and of itself, just your massive conglomeration of plugins and tools and this, that, and the other.
Yeah, the next level up, I think, is a challenging one. Even to think a while ago that we get to Vite's level of abstraction up the tree might have been difficult to imagine. Sorry, Fred, I also tried Snowpack and Vite at the exact same time, and that was the difference for me, that they'd kind of almost, even if the implementation was at that point not where it is today, there was something about the being able to generalize at that level of abstraction and being able to latch onto it. And then I think the next level is a lot harder. For me, the next level I think about immediately is routing and, file system routing and all that kind of stuff. And you start going, oh, maybe there's some common stuff there. And I think there might be, but I also think that that's where you start getting into that range because, I mean, I have a whole theory on this thing, but essentially routing backbone of web, every time we have paradigm shifts, every time there's like a generation frameworks, is all based around the routing. This is a very ingrained thing. And it's something that even though we kind of know there's general points to, there isn't even complete agreement there. So I think we're, I'm saying this right now, I think we're almost at that level where right now where we can't go much higher, but something's going to come up and it's going to surprise us. So who knows? But that's where my feeling is right now. That's like the next thing.
It's interesting that some of those things maybe are also slightly outside of Vite in terms of it's what Vite has to, the scope of Vite, for example. So file-based routing is a very interesting thing and something that obviously I spend some time working with as well. And I mean, my heart would absolutely be to collaborate on anything like that, which is very much why we've extracted things out into separate GitHub organization. So that we can have an after party after this frameworks chat and talk about opportunities to collaborate with some of the Nitro stuff.
The other one is the adapters. Sorry, I just want to throw that out before I jump off again. But the fact that we all deploy to the same cloud platforms and they all have like the same thing, target output that we need to get to. I don't know if we can quite cross, but I just want to throw that one in too.
Surely we can, right? So I mean, I just merged incremental static regeneration for Netlify into Nitro earlier today, and there's a PR for Versal, and there is no reason. I feel like I'm undermining Nuxt in some way here, which I'm totally not, but there is no reason that you have to use Nitro with Nuxt. You can use Nitro with any framework here, and you get that out of the box. I mean, obviously, it's perfectly good to do things separately as well, but I mean, the insights just looking around the room here. I feel like I'm turning this into something else, but I would love to work and collaborate on some of these things.
Yeah, it's crazy. I've talked to every single person that possible that I can about the meta frameworks, even people outside of Vite, and trying to like pull them in. And it comes down to a lot of us are doing the same work because there's kind of this thing where most of the cloud providers now are working off of the request response model, and that's actually making its way into the meta frameworks and even as this kind of common platform. And it's like, it'd be awesome. I don't know, again, completely do it. And I guess Nitro is an example of where you made an agnostic version of this, that we could all just get our requests and responses and just be like, okay, we're good.
Yeah, there's something so interesting about this group. I think everyone here is using Vite as a JS API, ultimately. They're using the SSR runtime, they're using the build maybe, and it's very different. Someone mentioned the word scope, and I think about that a lot. Like when you go to Vite's doc site and check out their starters, it's seen as this kind of all-in-one builder. Like it is its own start and end. You use Vite to build a site, but then you get into these projects and they all use it as a thing to build on top of. So I think getting back to the original question, that's something that I would love to see more of an investment in. I think Vite does a great job at some of the SSR stuff. You feel like you're using it maybe not the wrong way, but in like this other way, versus what the doc site is very much about Vite, the build tool. We kind of use it one level below, and it's an interesting flow that I think a lot of Vite users don't see, but it's secretly powering all these other projects. And if you multiply all their users, it ends up feeling like a huge use case for Vite that obviously gets us very excited.
I think even without jumping to another level, there's still stuff that Vite's able to add in the future. I think Vite 4 is coming around the corner and starting to get excited and thinking about what's happening there. Like Fred said, Vite has traditionally been a JS builder. So like one of the things that we're really interested in looking at, Bjorn Liu contributes a lot to both Svelte and Vite and built Svelte pre-bundling as a feature. And so, we've historically only pre-bundled JavaScript libraries, but we also want to start doing that with Svelte libraries to make that much faster to load. And I think that that's something that hopefully we can turn on by default with Vite 4.
I sort of even got this impression, and correct me if this is the wrong analogy, working in other language and in other environments, the LLVM has sort of taken that idea of compiler optimization to the next level, where everyone sort of like interacts with the LLVM to get like all that sort of advanced optimizations and stuff for free. Like as long as you target this, you get that output. I think any language now has like an LLVM target compile. That's what popped up as a analogy, Ryan, when you mentioned the adapters, is like this idea that like all the cloud providers seem to be going in a specific model. And is there a place here to sort of align our needs collectively as a larger group and be like, okay, the adapter seems to be close enough to the same. Can we all sort of maybe make a bridge or a link or some sort of compilation target instead of doing this work over and over again?
Yeah, I'll throw a plug out. I really like some of these ideas that we're talking about, the next level of like, could it be easier, for example, to have like some sort of common runtime sort of implementation or abstraction so everyone doesn't have to do it over and over again? I'll just throw a call out to the Web Interoperable Runtimes community group that just recently started up. It's got a number of representatives from Cloudflare, from Vercel, Dino, Node, that are all on there trying to establish sort of some standards that these runtimes can implement, because a lot of them are just running some sort of V8 isolate at the edge or some sort of implementation, but the actual JavaScript APIs that are available and such are not standard. And so I think for Vite to implement a higher abstraction, it would also be super helpful, again, to have a more common standardization of what APIs are available in those runtimes. And sure, I guess Vite can maybe abstract it away, but at the same time, I think having better standards would really help. So if anyone watching this has interest in helping that, there's always help needed in that standardization process.
Is that the group? I want to say I came across something. It's like Dino and Node and the web APIs and Cloudflare and the workers and like everyone sort of working on the web API interface. Am I getting that kind of right?
Yeah.
Like half right?
Yeah. So you just think about like if you're deploying to Cloudflare versus deploying to Dino, what sorts of APIs are you going to have access to? What sort of crypto APIs? What sort of like APIs do they just provide available with the JavaScript runtime that you're interacting with? And if you think about what Ryan said, honestly, that's just painful for us. Like we're just constantly trying to make Hydrogen work on all of these runtimes. And there's just subtle inconsistencies with it. And then all of us have to deal with it. I feel like with our frameworks, we got to be like, okay, there's some sort of random thing that's slightly different from one of these runtimes. And our users are on GitHub saying, it doesn't work on Cloudflare for this reason. And we're like, oh man, well, yeah, Cloudflare is a little bit different than these other ones. So like if there could be consensus on how these platforms work, it'd be easier for us to actually deploy to them.
Nice. What is I'm having this flash of like getting things to work in IE and Firefox and Safari across the board very, 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 very quickly. What does success for this group sort of look like in interacting with a consortium like the committee? The name isn't really rolling off my tongue. Web interface.
It's the Web Interoperable Runtimes Community Group, or Winter CG.
Okay, that's way better. I was going to say they definitely need like an acronym or something, because I'm not going to be able to remember that at all. Winter's coming. So what is for the group here? What would be success? Like where would success be for it? Where would you consider that committee Winter CG to be successful if they were able to provide you or standardize across X? Like you've seen this group, they're working on these standardizations to try and help you guys out and take away some of the one-off edge cases. What does success look like from your standpoint for that group? Like fast forward maybe a year or two. Brett, what do you think? You brought up the group. Maybe I'm wondering if you've had any like daydreaming thoughts about, wouldn't it be nice if everything just aligned perfectly and I didn't have to deal with this?
Well, we have different essentially adapters for these different platforms that have to be separately maintained. And if there's a new feature or something with one of these platforms, is it available or exposed in our adapter in some form or another? And then who owns and maintains that adapter? Is that something owned and maintained by the Hydrogen or Shopify teams, or is it owned and maintained by like Vercel or somebody separately? So I guess success for us would just be simplifying all that, like, do I really need multiple adapters just to like deploy to like some sort of V8 isolate that hopefully is largely the same? I don't know. Just simplifying all that we have to do to support all these different runtimes would be success in my book.
Yeah, I'll shout out a project called Hat Tip I'm really excited about. It's a really interesting way to tackle this. Like, we're all doing the same work about adapters. What if we standardized it? It's not trying to build standard adapters. It's trying to build a standard API for what does it mean to create a server, listen to a request. I could totally see a future where that library, in the same way that we're all building on top of Vite as a JS API, we could all build on top of that as a common interface. But then this library basically does the work, and it's I believe looking forward to Winter CG. It's all based on those standards. So I could see a real space here where it's not about sharing common adapters. It's more about sharing common APIs that have been abstracted away to handle this. I'm very excited about that.
And what was that called? Fred, you said Hat Tip?
Hat Tip. Hat Tip JS is the GitHub org. I can post a link.
Yeah, that'd be Discord fantastic. Chat. Thank you. Ryan, you had a lot. You lit up when you said adapters earlier. What is your idea? Is the idea of success for you not ever having to think about adapters again, or is it something else?
I mean, this is a hard one because the layers just keep on pouring on and on and on when I kind of go down that train of thought. Yeah, I mean, I was just highlighting the pain points there. I worked, obviously, immediately went there. Other people had already been, doing work there. I looked at SvelteKit; they were there very early on as influence, and just like realized that. And then I looked at Remix, and then again, like it was like all these like notes in the adapters, like don't do this; it doesn't work on this platform, and like, yeah, I mean, this is one of the most painful things. But standards are also really, really hard because they take a long time to consolidate. And then, you want to be involved in the standards process, but like there's often different goals and different pieces. And I mean, and you could end up with, I don't know, web components or something. But essentially, we'll have to see how this goes. I'm optimistic, at least right now.
I mean, of course.
Go ahead, Daniel.
I mean, of course, there's multiple pieces here, right? So there's the runtime, which obviously is really important, and we need that common API and talking about it. But then, of course, there's a lot more to an adapter than just the JavaScript runtime, because you want things like what I was talking about, incremental static generation, which some platforms support, or something like that, or caching APIs, or being able to integrate into a CDN. And that goes far, I mean, that's totally extra. That's not JS runtime territory anymore. But you still also need some common tools for that kind of thing too. But that's maybe what Ben was also about to say.
Yeah, it sounds like a whole ecosystem that you just rattled off, Daniel. Something that we talked earlier about, Vite sort of taking the best of breed and some of the ideas that we've learned over, and it takes a while too, right? It's got to bake and sort of, I remember doing gulp concatenate, and then Webpack was like, oh, this is better, and now it's bespoke Webpack, and now we iterate, and I feel like and better stuff, in 10, 20 years, Vite will be superseded, but I feel like this adapter space, we've sort of found something tangible to hold on, like enough common pieces to pull together for adapters, or maybe not. Ben, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, so we actually have probably about 20 adapters, and they're mostly community maintained because, we just can't be familiar with that many different platforms and all the intricacies of all of them. And so, we definitely see authors having to, kind of reinvent some of the same patterns. And I think, we've seen places where that has started to get better. I think now all the major platforms, all the major hosting platforms now support ESM, which has been a really big win for us. Undici has allowed us to like have native fetch built in directly to Node, which has been really nice. And so hopefully we'll continue to see more traction in that direction. One last thing I was going to add too is that we actually, like, one interesting feature we have in SvelteKit is this idea of SSR route splitting. So we can actually like deploy each one of your routes on a different Lambda, and that keeps the size really small. It makes the startup really fast, and as a request comes in, it'll get handled, I think, much more quickly than if we were to bundle the app as a single bundle and deploy it. That also makes sharing adapters across the ecosystem a little harder, though, because now the adapters have to be a bit familiar with our routing system in order to split based on those routes. It has to have some knowledge of SvelteKit's routing. And so, we actually made some efforts to share adapters with some of the other projects and found out that was going to be pretty hard for that reason. So I really like this idea of continuing to work on the API standards for that reason.
I would love to talk to you at some other point about that, Ben, because we've taken the opposite approach. We have one single entry point, which has dynamic imports to all the different routes, so that the code is split. So actually loading the single handler doesn't load all the code into memory, but only the code that's actually required to render the result. But I'd love to talk to you about that in terms of the performance trade-offs that you've seen with having multiple functions needing separate cold starts, but the benefit of having a smaller bundle.
That is really, Fred brought up in the side chat, Fred brought up an interesting question. I'd like to pose this to the group. So we're talking about adapters, and we've been pushing out to the edge, with different deployment targets where, those functions may be on different servers across different environments, across different regions, or in a sort of centralized single server model where all, Daniel, what you were saying, where all the requests come into a central, and then that central server takes on. Are the frameworks, is that above the framework level when you guys are considering framework stuff? Are we thinking in terms of, are we building the framework to push out to the edge? Are we building the framework to stand up in my mind? I still think about it like I did 30 years ago, where there's a server and a box in a room with the tiles and a hot lane and a cold lane, and that's my mental model. And there's just a bunch of them now in different spots as opposed to just one big building. But that's the way I think about it. When you guys are working on your frameworks, is that your mental picture? Or are you thinking in framework pushing out to the edge? Or does that conversation come up in the adapter and you're like, okay, now I have to make decisions up here because of where those adapter like, are you basically trying to polyfill for edge versus central versus region versus, all this? Ryan, what do you think? I think I've made Ryan's head spin a full rotation just a second ago.
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky because it's kind of like a bit of both. Like, you're looking for this common ground, so you can just be like, okay, I can get it there. I can run on the edge. I can run on serverless. Whatever you need, we'll put it there. But on the same time, you're like, okay, if I'm on Cloudflare, I've got like R2 and KV stores and stuff, and then you're like, oh, I can use durable objects to do WebSockets from a serverless edge function. I can't do that other places. I don't think I could be expected to generalize that. So like, that's not a clear line for me, at least yet. But I mean, maybe Daniel's got something.
Well, I only that we have tried to generalize storage, so that we have this, which is this concept of unstorage, which also is decoupled from Nuxt, and also in the UnJS organization. I'm not a shill, I promise. So unstorage is basically KV storage that is compatible with lots of different drivers, including things like Cloudflare, Redis, memory cache, file system, stuff like that. And you can sort of merge them onto one. So you can use memory and dev and Redis in one environment and Cloudflare if you happen to deploy to Cloudflare. So we're trying, but I take your point that there are lots of things that platforms offer because they're trying to differentiate, of course, and therefore you can't have something that's 100% equal across all environments. So, a fair point.
Yeah, I think the ideal deployment target really varies by use case. And so like we've tried to make all of these toggles where if you want to deploy to the edge, you can do that. And if that's not what you're looking for, then, it's just an option. And so you can do either quite easily. And I think, also I didn't get a chance to answer Daniel's question earlier, but another one of the reasons why we built SSR route splitting as an option, and again, it's an option that you can turn on or off, like any of the other deployment features, is that like we've seen some of our larger users hit this limits of how big a bundle you can deploy, and so even if you're dynamically loading some of the code, the hosting platform's rejecting the deployment because your app is larger than X megabytes.
Hit that so many times. It's so frustrating. We have a hard stop. This group could go on for days and nights. We already have an after party on routing. Look out for Daniel's invite. Sounds like a wild time. This group really knows how to at a party. We've got maybe 60 seconds, so I want to go around the room and give everyone one last chance to shill their favorite shiny new thing. It can be music, video, comic book, whatever you have seen that is amazing that you must share with the world. And Brett, because you are at the top of the box, I'm going to start with you.
Oh man, I've got to shill something on the spot. I don't know.
Have you heard the good word about Hydrogen?
Oh yeah,
an e-commerce platform on top of Shop. Oh.
Yeah, I could be the corporate shill there and just say that, I guess. But I can't think of anything at the moment. I might come up at the end if I think of something.
All right, we'll go to Ben. Ben, what have you got?
All right, I don't have a pop culture answer, but in the coding world, we're working on building better support for vTest and vImage tools directly into SvelteKit and our documentations and ecosystem.
Yes, anything for better testing, I will take it. Any effort there has my all-time gratitude. Miško, what about you?
I have to top my own horn here a little bit. I think the thing to talk about is resumability over hydration. I think people should check it out and educate themselves. Qlik is not the only framework who does resumability. There are others. But I think it's the way of the future. Ryan is laughing. Go, Ryan. Make fun of me.
No. I want to talk. Actually, yeah, I'm going to push TanStack and TanStack queries, TanStack location. We've talked a lot about Vite and agnostic solutions and how we're all here. They've been making adapters or integrations with all the other frameworks, and this is something obviously very felt by Solid, whose ecosystem is a bit smaller than the others. But yeah, Solid Query just came out based on TanStack Query, Solid Table. All these things are basically off these generic things, and they have integrations with Svelte, Vue, React. Really cool stuff being done by Tanner Lindsley.
Yeah, I'll double down on the TanStack. Documentation is top notch. It is always the place where I can find, like, I don't have to go to the gist or the issues. It's always the place. The documentation is the reason I come back to that stack as well.
Yeah.
Fred?
Oh, Ryan stole mine. That was going to be mine. I've been really, really into that project lately as I play around with some more client-side stuff. TRPC, another fun project that I've been playing around with a lot. You can tell I'm living in TypeScript world where I just now am impressed by anyone who does any really cool automatic typing. And HatTip, that other project I shouted out, which I didn't realize had a talk by the author at VComp. So there we go, full circle.
Nice. All right, we'll check out was it this morning?
I believe so.
All right, we'll check it out on the flip side on the 12 p.m. showing, or afterwards you can watch the talk on HatTip. Good shout out. Daniel, what have you got for us?
So I was totally going to go in the direction of TRPC, which is amazing. But check out Zod, for example, along the same lines. Wonderful validation of data and even parsing it and shaping it, throwing the right kind of errors, and doing that at the interface where you have unknown data coming into your app, such as when you're fetching data from remote APIs. really makes a world of difference, because it means that your type safe app is actually as safe as the data that you validated. So that's a super tool. And one more thing, if I can actually, in this case, toot. It's actually not my own horn. This came from the Google Aurora team, but something called Fontaine or Fontaine. I'll put it in the Discord chat. It's a framework agnostic library. It's built with Unplugin, so it works in any Vite framework. Drop it in, and it creates automatic font fallbacks, so your custom web fonts don't flicker around the page when you use them. And it's totally based on algorithms from the Aurora team. Check it out.
Very nice. All right, we've got 10 seconds. Brett, last words.
All right, I'll throw out, check out Preact Signals from the Preact team, just recently announced by Jason Miller. Just kind of an entirely new way of thinking about reactive data in kind of the React world.
Awesome. Thank you so much to everyone on the panel for coming in and giving us your thoughts, your ideas, your time. I think we had a really interesting conversation on adapters, routers, files, Vite, and the ecosystem at large. This group is always a blast to get together. I always have such an amazing time. Thank you, everyone, for coming. We appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of VConf.